don't mind cutting holes in my boat. Sometimes I take bigger holes and I make smaller holes. Like the port light over my galley doesn't open. So when you're cooking, especially in the summertime, you know, that steam bill, you can't get rid of anything. So I took that big long port light out, fiberglassed it in, put a new port light in, a smaller one, that opens. And I found a few other through holes I don't use anymore. I filled them in. When I got the propane stove, the locker that came with it, I needed to drain that overboard, so there's a through hole. When I put the air conditioning in, had to put a through hole for the discharge. Now, I didn't need to put one through hole through the bottom of the boat because I had an extra one when we put our composting toilet in and took the marine head out. That gave me a seacock and a through hole that I could use, and it was big enough to supply water to the air conditioning. So that's one time I didn't have to cut a hole in the boat. But then I also had to drill a few holes along the way to get the ductwork to go from the HVAC to the V-berth. So a couple more holes in the boat. At least they're not below the water. When I got the boat, it had a new engine put in it a few months before. When they put it in, I mean, I don't know how they got it in there. There's like this much room between the top of the engine and the bottom of the floor in the cockpit. So I lived with that for a while, but eventually that just got to be too much. So I cut an access port in that, one that opens up. Now I can get to everything. And that is really important. For example, when I had to have my fuel injectors changed, I don't know how the guy would have done it if I didn't have that access panel. There's just no way he would have been able to get in there, reach that. We would have had to pull the engine. So I think that port cost me like $38. No brainer. You know what I mean? It's just so much easier to work on everything now. And I just did a project on my freshwater holding tank. I took the smaller port, I made a bigger port in it. Not that it's a new hole, it's just a bigger hole. Oh, and another project I did earlier was my anchor locker didn't have a floor in it, so I put a floor in that. So I had, you know, the water would just drain down the middle of the boat back to the bilge. That got stinky after a while and it's dirty. So I had to drill a hole for the overboard discharge for the drain in the anchor locker. And then in the V-berth, I had to drill an access panel so I could get in and hook the drain up. So here, like in this picture, you see here's the bigger access port that I put in for the fresh water. There's another hole. I don't know. I look down in there. It just goes down into the hull of the boat. But I found an old screwdriver. I found some papers. I found some screws. I found a flashlight. So they probably cut that in there to pull things out. I don't think they ever pulled anything out. But then you see the other black one on the back. That's my access panel to underneath the anchor locker floor. And then of course every time you add something to the boat, like the dinghy davits, all right, got to drill holes for the through holes for that. The solar panel arch that I built, had to drill holes, through bolt that in. Seems like every time I turn around, I'm drilling a hole somewhere or cutting a hole somewhere. Luckily, most of them have been above the water line. The few I've had to put in below the water line, really just changing and updating the seacocks. Haven't had to drill any new holes in the hull of the boat below the water line. Seems like everything I'm doing, thank goodness, is above the water line. And on my anchor and anchor locker and the bow roller I put on for the anchor, I'm thinking about putting an access panel on the deck maybe similar to what I did with the fresh water tank, just something like 6 or 8 inches, just so that when I'm putting the rope down, the rope pipe, I can reach in there and I can help pull it instead of just trying to feed that down. You guys who have that, you know what I'm talking about. It's just aggravating. So there's another hole I might be planning on putting onto the boat. Well, anyway, guys, until next time, happy and safe boating to you, your family, and friends.